Recently, I decided to go ahead and get involved in the Proving Grounds, a place in World of Warcraft that has made its ways to test players and their skills in combat since Mists of Pandaria. The goal of the grounds was to see how well I could handle 50 corruption as a tank, and by extent practice certain situations that I need to get down if I wanted to do higher level mythic dungeons, with the comfort of knowing I wouldn't be completely screwed if I ran the setup I had. Now, never mind that running 50 corruption as a tank is probably a stupid idea, that's not the focus of the video. What is the focus is that the Proving Grounds have become outdated and discarded, similar to most of Blizzard's previous expansion endeavors. Yet they decided to scale it up to the current expansion's level like it's not absolutely dated and needs to be changed for the sake of challenge and actual practice. Simply put, the Proving Grounds for anyone who actually knows their class well enough to put together a proper rotation is a pointless thing that will have you bored with it after you get to a certain round. I have a prime example of this in my 50 corruption run. I decided I wanted to go ahead and pop into endless waves and see how long I could do in terms of difficulty with potentially scaling mobs. Instead, what I got was the same mobs coming up every 10 rounds with the same markers telling me that they may be doing 1% more damage than the previous pass before them. This same cycle of rinse and repeat was easily countered, and therefore it didn't provide me any challenge up on that front. In my opinion, that isn't really such a bad thing. Dungeons don't normally change up unless they have teaming, so I didn't see this as a big problem. What I did see as a problem, though, is how many rounds it would have taken for me to actually get the level of competition I wanted to push for my warrior's limits. No joke, I went almost 90 rounds without hardly taking any real damage and needing to use cooldowns. I ended up stopping at round 93, but not because of the challenge itself. It came down to the fact that my armor needed repairs, and I couldn't actually repair it in the middle of the thing. My shield in particular was at one durability point. I had to stop because of the armor's limitations. And if you don't believe me, here's the rounds of me going up to wave 90 and showing you my shield. It's clear I don't have much left on it, and doing this challenge with a 280 shield, which was the only other thing in my bag, wasn't going to help me in a real keelstone. I wouldn't switch to that there. Why would I do it here? My point is the Proving Grounds won't advocate real situations in which you as a tank, healer, or damage dealer will capably have to practice in a mythic dungeon. Yes, the basics are there, and if you're really struggling with a certain class or specialization, then the Proving Grounds can be a good jump off point. And if it's just meant to test beginners and their strengths, then I think it's fine for that kind of task. But I think in its current state, anyone who is looking to test out different specializations, playstyles, or so on for certain situations will find it extremely hard to get anything good out of the Proving Grounds, simply because they're too easy, or don't give you the proper circumstance at which you could really test the limits of your own mechanical playstyle or movements. As a result, the Proving Grounds have been mostly forgotten, save for a few people wanting to get an easy title from completing 30 rounds of endless waves. That may seem like a lot, but in reality, if you know your class well enough, it won't take much sweat to get there. Like I said, I completed 93 rounds before I decided to jump off the bandwagon, and I'm not even a Mythic Raider. So why does this matter? Well, I look at it similar to how I do pre-made roleplays. It has potential to be useful and could really make some good practice in games so that way people can be prepared for situations. But instead of being good to help people, it's a simple time waster for anyone who even remembers it exists in this game. It's also clear to me that Blizzard wants people to use the Proving Grounds to some extent, as if they didn't, they wouldn't scale the level of it every single expansion to match the cap marker despite it being created in Mists of Pandaria. So now that I've explained my thoughts on the Proving Grounds, I should maybe go ahead and explain how I think it could be improved in ways to make it more valuable to the player base, and to where Blizzard's programming to cap it to max level could become more viable. Keep in mind before I state these that I am not a programmer or a game designer, so I wouldn't know what all goes into such ideas, but I figured if it's possible to do it, they should explore these routes and see what they can come up with. With that noted, let's go ahead and get right down to what should be done. First, the prime concept of the Proving Grounds as it isn't a bad thing. As I mentioned before, those who are needing to practice rotations or getting the hang of a new class can find some viability in the Proving Grounds, as it does give them a goal to shoot for, and therefore extends the longevity of what is the equivalent of a practice range. I personally would want to keep the current system in, but then add a few new things so that way the Proving Grounds can be viable to more advanced players who maybe already have their rotation and class played down, but are needing to test other things such as circumstantial issues. So let's go ahead and start off with a list. Number one thing I would do, I'd consider putting in Mythic Plus affixes into the Proving Grounds. This would allow players to mix and match affixes to properly suit their circumstances they're looking for. An example of this would be if you're a tank who is struggling with managing necrotic and bursting, then you could go into the Proving Grounds, turn both of those affixes on, and then do practice endless runs to see how far you can get with those two procs currently getting involved. This way ensures that you can get practices on fixtures so that way you're not wasting time into the actual Mythic Plus keystones with no real idea of what you're doing or how you're going to do it. Is this going to give you the game sense for every circumstance? Not really, I wouldn't think, but it can certainly give you an extent on how far your own character's limits go and what you may need to do to improve working with certain affixes. Of course, the slight downside of this is that practicing seasonal fixes will require more programming on the developer's part to implement, but honestly, even having the regular, never changing fixes to practice would be better than just cruising through rounds where the enemies are hardly doing anything to you. And that's going to go ahead and bring me to my second point, and that is to allow people to practice certain high levels of difficulty to match the mythic dungeons. Now, what I mean by this is, let's say you have a high item leveled tank who is running endless waves right now. That tank is very unlikely to get any good beneficial training at the lower ends of the endless waves because the enemies aren't going to do enough to them to make it worthwhile. I know when I decided to run the trials, it wasn't until about round 80 where things started getting a little bit hectic. And even then, that may have just been me zoning out and not paying too much attention because it took me so long to get to the point where things were becoming more difficult for my certain style. So what I'm asking for is, make it to where someone can enter in, look up a certain difficulty for a Mythic Plus, and then queue themselves into that difficulty so that they're locked in on damage selection that they want to practice. That way, they don't lose interest or focus on it. They can still get some endless wave practice, and they can practice the proper fixes on top of it. This stuff alone would make the Proving Grounds way more viable in the current meta. Now, another thing I'd like to see is allowing people to queue into Proving Grounds as a group. Now, Proving Grounds has always been a solo type deal where you go in and test your own strength and see how well you do. And I think that's fine and dandy. If someone wants to do that, I think the option should be there for that player. But imagine this, you have a team who wants to get better at certain fixes so they can reliably do a keystone and know what to expect in terms of the mechanics that have been added. Well, if you have the Proving Ground set up to where people could go do that, then you'd make it to where a group could go in, set up those affixes, set up the level difficulty, and then play it out as if they were in a dungeon. You could scale up the difficulty depending on how many of them are players versus NPCs, and design the Proving Grounds in a way that is tough for both solo players and groups alike. Because let's be real, most everything revolving around progression is going to require your group efforts. Mythic Plus does, Raiding does, Battlegrounds, Arenas, you name it. You're going to have to rely on others to help you move forward. So why isn't the Proving Ground set up to where you could practice with certain players so that way you can all get better? Sure, there are training dummies, but that's not going to help you overall as a team. Instead, let's make it to where people can go in their designated groups and practice a difficulty that they're struggling with or have never encountered before. I should address that the changes I'd like to see to the Proving Grounds may have not been what Blizzard intended the grounds to be like. Perhaps it was simply designed to test a solo player's skill in fixed arenas, and it would have been bragging rights to your friends on how insane you are to get to Endless Wave 93. But I have to ask this though, is the Proving Grounds really worth keeping around if that's the case? Is it really going to take this game to the next level? And my honest opinion on this is that in its current state, it won't. But it's possible to make it such. The concept of what I assume is a training ground could be very well impactful to teams wanting to start themselves off playing competitively if these fixes were made. That means more publicity towards the leagues, and by extent, more publicity towards the game. There's a real potential impact that could be made here by giving average players opportunities to do more than go in and waste time for a couple hours on pointless waves of enemies. That's really all I have to say on the topic. Proving Grounds is certainly a forgettable place for anyone who isn't trying to learn a rotation. I want to know what you all think. Comment down below if you agree or disagree, and if you disagree, tell me why. I'm interested to see what other ideas could bloom from this. Thanks everyone for watching, and if you liked the video, leave it a like, subscribe if you want more content like this, and join me on my Twitch streams at twitch.tv/CamXGame every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 p.m. Central. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you all soon.